The silence in the Atlantic diner at 3:17 in the morning was the kind of silence that swallowed sound whole. Neon tubes hummed a sickly pink against the winter dark, casting everything in the color of dying flesh. Vivien Rivera sat in the back booth, her orthopedic shoes worn through at the heel, counting crumpled bills under the fluorescent glow with the precision of someone who had counted money this way 10,000 times before. $78. That was everything. That was her entire world distilled into paper and lint and the fading smell of other people's breakfasts. Rafael Corsetti watched her from the corner booth, a man constructed entirely of controlled violence. 6 feet 2 inches of Italian heritage wrapped in a charcoal suit that cost more than everything she owned combined. His dark hair silvered at the temples. His eyes were storm gray and absolutely still. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade had once tried to cut him in half and failed. On his left wrist, a gold watch worth $200,000 caught the diner's neon light and threw it back diminished. He had been watching Vivien Rivera for 3 weeks. Marco stood behind him, Rafael's lieutenant for 15 years, his hand resting on the concealed weapon beneath his tailored jacket. Marco was thick-necked, 42 years old, with eyes that had seen things that made most men weep. He did not ask questions anymore. He waited for Rafael's orders. That was how this worked. That was how this had always worked in the Corsetti family. For 3 weeks, Rafael had watched her leave the small apartment he provided above the bakery on Hanover Street at 2 in the morning carrying heavy canvas bags she had never brought inside. At 4 in the morning, she returned. Exhausted. Her hands wrapped in white bandages that were not there the night before. On her second night of this pattern, Rafael had sent Pietro to follow her. On her 4th night, he had watched the surveillance footage himself, frame by frame, his jaw tightening with each second that passed. In Rafael's world, betrayal had only one price. 1. Death came in many forms, quick and merciful, or slow enough that the person begging for it understood exactly why they were begging. Death was the only language traitors understood. He had learned this lesson 15 years ago on a night that still visited his dreams wearing his brother's face. Vincent Corsetti had smiled like Vivien smiled now. That same exhausted, secretive, guilty smile. Vincent had been the golden son, the heir, the one their father had chosen to rebuild the family after the Salvatores murdered their way into Boston. And Vincent had sold them all for $500,000. He had walked into a Salvatore safe house on Atlantic Avenue and traded every name, every operation, every weakness of the Corsetti organization like a man selling used furniture at a yard sale. The FBI had found Vincent 3 days later in the Charles River. Rafael had arranged it personally. He had not cried. He had not prayed. He never prayed. Vivien counted the bills again. Her lips moved silently. $78. The same number it had been the first time she counted it. Money did not transform through repetition. It only became sadder with each recount, each acknowledgement that this was real, that this was all, that $78 was the distance between her and absolute ruin. She folded the bills carefully and slipped them into her apron pocket. She did not notice Rafael watching. She did not notice Marco. She did not notice the 2 other men in black sitting at the counter, ordering nothing, drinking nothing, their presence designed to be invisible to everyone except the person they were sent to monitor. Rafael knew the story. He knew everything. He had learned years ago that ignorance was a luxury the powerful could not afford. Vivien Rivera was 27 years old but looked decades older. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back so tightly it seemed to hurt, though Rafael suspected the hurt came from somewhere deeper than hair pulled tight. Her eyes were a brown so dark they looked black in this light, and they carried the particular exhaustion of someone who had not slept in days, maybe weeks. She wore a waitress uniform, pink and white striped, stained with the grease of 1,000 breakfast rushes. Her name tag read Viv in fading letters. A daughter. Age 6. Named Lily. Living with Vivien's mother in an apartment in Roxbury that had a heating system that worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays if you talked to it nicely. Vivien had a debt of $200,000 to Marcus Webb, her landlord, due in 11 days now. 12 days when Rafael first began watching her. Marcus Webb was the kind of man who collected debts the way other men collected watches, and he collected payment the way other men collected broken bones. The foreclosure notice sat in Vivien's apartment, crumpled and read 100 times. Rafael had seen a photograph of it. He saw everything. Marco shifted his weight. A question was building behind his eyes. 15 years of loyalty meant Rafael could read the unspoken words. Why are we watching a woman who counts money like a child? Why has she not been dealt with? Why do we wait? Rafael did not answer because he did not have an answer. Not yet. Not in words that made sense. The diner door chimed. A sound like a bell tied around the neck of something dying. Vivien glanced up, startled, then back down. She gathered her things slowly. An old coat. A purse held together with a safety pin. She moved toward the register, where a tired woman with grey streaking her hair stood motionless, waiting to close this place down and go home to a life that was almost certainly not better. Closing time, honey, the woman said. Not unkind. Just tired. The voice of someone who had said this same thing at 3:17 in the morning for 23 years. I know, Vivien said. Her voice was trembling like a candle in wind. Like something about to go out. I was just finishing counting my tips. I know I'm over. You're not over. You stayed for your shift. You earned what you earned. Vivien nodded. She did not argue. Arguments were a luxury for people with options. Rafael watched her walk toward the door. He watched the way she moved, like someone carrying weight that had nothing to do with the physical world. Like someone whose bones themselves were tired. The diner door chimed again as she left. Marco leaned down. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead quiet of the diner it sounded like a gunshot. Orders? No, Rafael said. You want me to follow? No. But she's... I know what she is, Rafael said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like the ground after an earthquake has finished moving. Like thunder that had learned to speak. Marco withdrew. He had learned not to push. Rafael Corsetti had come back from the Salvatore's war missing 3 men from his inner circle and carrying the knowledge that his own brother had sold him to the highest bidder. That did something to a man. That rewrote the code he lived by. That turned mercy into a memory of weakness. But sitting in the corner booth of the Atlantic Diner at 3:17 in the morning, watching the taillights of Vivien Rivera's ancient Honda Civic disappear into the Boston winter, Rafael Corsetti felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. Something that felt almost like recognition. Almost like the night he had pulled Vincent from the Charles River and looked at his brother's bloated face and understood that there were kinds of betrayal that were really just kinds of love wearing betrayal's clothes. He did not know, not yet, what she was doing on those nighttime runs with the heavy bags and the bandaged hands. He did not know that in 11 days, Marcus Webb would corner her in a freezer, would place his hands around her throat with the casual confidence of a man who had never faced consequences, would leave her bleeding and one-eyed on a checkered floor. He did not know that she was working 3 jobs, not 2. That her daughter Lily was sick with a heart condition that required surgery. That the $200,000 was not a debt at all but a medical bill masquerading as a loan from a man who had learned that desperation was more profitable than actual lending. He did not know that his brother's betrayal and her sacrifice were not the same story at all. That he would spend the next 3 months learning the difference between someone who breaks faith and someone who breaks herself trying to keep faith alive. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Because what happens next will change everything. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go to 6 weeks earlier, to the freezing winter night when Rafael Corsetti first saw Vivien Rivera walking out of the Atlantic Diner, and understand how a woman with $78 to her name and a daughter fighting to breathe became the one thing a Mafia boss could not afford to lose. 6 weeks before everything changed, before the men in suits arrived with their cold eyes and colder intentions, Vivien Rivera stood behind the counter of the Atlantic Diner on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, counting bills that would not add up to survival. 3:42 in the morning. January 14th. The temperature outside had dropped to 9 degrees, and frost coated the windows like diamond dust, like the world had frozen solid and forgotten to thaw. The neon open sign buzzed and flickered, red, blue, red, casting everything in sickly alternating light. The checkered black and white floor, worn smooth by 40 years of footsteps, stretched the length of the diner like a battlefield where exhaustion had won every war. Vivien's orthopedic shoes were worn through at the left heel. She could feel the cold tile underneath her bare foot. Her white apron bore the stains of 2 shifts, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then 6 p.m. to 3 a.m., ketchup and grease and the accumulated debris of feeding people who did not look at her, did not thank her, did not see her as anything more than the hands that brought them eggs and coffee. She sorted the tips into piles on the prep counter. 3 singles here. 2 quarters. A dime. She had worked for 9 hours and earned $78. This money would buy groceries for 4 days if she did not eat. It would buy medicine for Lily's heart medication for 1 week. It would cover neither and both, which meant it covered nothing at all. The smell of bacon grease, baked into every surface of the diner like a permanent stain, made her stomach contract. She had eaten a piece of toast 12 hours ago. Before that, she had eaten nothing, and before that, nothing again. She had learned to think of hunger as a quiet companion instead of a warning signal. Your body stops screaming when you ignore it long enough. In the corner booth, booth 7, the one facing the door, a man sat with an untouched cup of coffee. He had been there for 2 hours. He wore a black wool coat that cost more than her monthly rent, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. His hands were large and scarred, resting on the table with the casual confidence of someone who had never been refused anything. She had poured his coffee at 1:47 in the morning, and he had nodded once, and she had retreated because men like this did not want service. They wanted obedience. His name was Rafael Corsetti. She did not know this yet. The bell above the door chimed, sharp, bright, wrong. 3 men in leather jackets entered, bringing cold air that made the few remaining customers look up from their plates. These men moved through the diner with the loose-jointed ease of predators, scanning the room with the casual calculation of people for whom violence was a tool as common as knives and forks. They stopped at booth 3. An elderly man sat there, eating eggs with the slow deliberation of someone tasting flavor for the first time. His coat was threadbare, the collar frayed. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the fork. This was Mr. Chen, who came to the diner every morning at 3, always ordered the same eggs, always left a $2 tip he could not afford. Vivien knew his daughter had died last summer. She knew he lived alone. She knew he came to the diner because the fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee made him feel less invisible than his apartment did. Mr. Chen, the lead man said, his voice loud enough to carry through the entire diner, loud enough to make the cook freeze in the kitchen. Mr. Chen owes Mr. Webb $12,000. Time to pay, or time to bleed. The old man's fork clattered onto his plate. The 3 men gathered around his booth like wolves circling prey. One of them placed his hand on the back of Mr. Chen's chair. The ancient customer's hands began to shake, not from fear, Vivien would later understand, but from the weight of knowing that he had run out of places to hide. Vivien walked straight toward them. She moved the way she moved through every threat that came through the diner door, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned that the only way to survive predators was to never let them see you as prey. "He is eating breakfast," she said. Her voice did not shake, though every nerve in her body was screaming. "You can wait outside." The 3 men turned to look at her. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that has a physical weight, that presses down on your chest and makes breathing harder. Then they laughed. The lead man reached out and grabbed her wrist, twisting it upward until the coffeepot slipped from her fingers. It fell to the checkered floor and shattered, coffee spreading across the black and white tiles like a dark map of nowhere. The sound was enormous in the small diner. The cook did not emerge from the kitchen. The other customers stared at their plates. "Little waitress playing hero," the man said, his grip tightening. "That is not your debt, girl." That is not your fight. Vivien felt pain bloom across her wrist, sharp and bright. She did not pull away. She looked directly into his eyes, dark, empty, the kind of eyes that had learned not to see other people as real. "This is a public place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more dangerous. "You want to hurt someone, do it somewhere else." The man raised his hand to strike. But in that same moment, something changed in the diner. It was not loud. It was not violent. It was simply that Rafael Corsetti, the man in the corner booth with the untouched coffee, stood up from his seat. He did not speak. He did not move toward them. He simply stood, and in standing, his presence filled the entire room like poison gas filling a closed chamber. There was something in his face, a scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone, pale and ancient, that made men recognize their own mortality. The three men saw him. The blood drained from their faces like someone had pulled a plug at the base of their skulls. They backed toward the door, stammering apologies to someone they could not name, could not understand, knew only that staying in this room would end in ways they could not survive. They collided with each other in their panic to reach the exit. The bell chimed again, sharp and bright, and they were gone into the January night. Mr. Chen's hand stopped shaking. He looked at Vivien, and tears began to run down his weathered face. Not from fear. From gratitude. From the shock of being seen, being protected, being treated as if his life mattered. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Vivien returned to wiping down the tables, moving through the diner on autopilot, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline had begun to wear off. Her wrist throbbed. The coffeepot lay in pieces on the checkered floor, looking like it had never been whole. She did not notice that Rafael Corsetti left $100 on his table for a $3 cup of coffee. She did not see him stand, button his coat, and walk toward the door. She did not hear the bell chime one final time as he stepped out into the frozen darkness of Commonwealth Avenue, where black SUVs waited on the curb, where men in dark suits straightened as they saw him emerge, where the night itself seemed to hold its breath. But what neither of them understood in that moment was that Marcus Webb had already received word of what happened at the Atlantic Diner at 3:51 in the morning. Webb, the landlord who owned the building where Vivien rented her small apartment, the same building where she could barely afford the rent, the same landlord who had been waiting for leverage, waiting for an excuse, waiting for a reason, he had found it. He had found her. And by morning, he would set in motion a chain of events that would bring a Mafia boss and 20 men to her door, that would create a debt that could never be paid, that would force her to choose between her daughter's life and her own survival. But for now, she finished wiping the tables. For now, she swept the broken coffeepot into a dustpan. For now, she clocked out at 4:17 in the morning, her wrist already bruising in the shape of fingers, her $78 in tips still in her jacket pocket, and she walked out into the Boston winter, unaware that her invisible life was about to become the most visible thing in the city. She had no idea that in exactly 12 days, a man with scarred hands and eyes like storm clouds would become the reason she survived at all. Rafael Corsetti sat in booth 12 while the pre-dawn cold pressed against the diner windows like something alive, something waiting. The checkered floor gleamed under fluorescent light. The neon Budweiser sign hummed its electric lullaby. And Vivien Rivera stood in the walk-in freezer, her breath coming in white clouds, her throat wrapped in the grip of Marcus Webb's hand like a vice, like a blade cutting off the oxygen her lungs screamed for. She clawed at his fingers. Black spots danced across her vision. The cold metal shelf bit into her spine as he slammed her head back, once, twice, 3 times, each impact a thunderclap inside her skull. Blood pooled in her mouth, copper and salt. His palm pressed harder against her windpipe. She could not breathe. She could not scream. She could only understand, in that suspended moment between consciousness and darkness, that this was what happens to people like her, to nobodies, to the invisible, to women who work 3 jobs and still cannot save their own daughters. He released her and she collapsed among the lettuce crates like a puppet with its strings cut. Her body folded. Her lungs gasped for air that seemed too thin, too cold. 11 minutes passed. 11 minutes of lying on concrete at 34 degrees while her eye swelled shut and handprint bruises bloomed across her throat in shades of purple and red and dying violet. When she finally pushed herself up, her movements were mechanical, broken, the movements of someone who had stopped believing in tomorrow. She pushed through the freezer door at 3:47 in the morning. Blood ran from her split lip, staining her white apron. One eye had swollen completely shut. Her throat bore the evidence of his hands, 5 fingers on the left side, thumb on the right, a map of violence written in purple ink across her skin. The overnight cook, a young man named Danny, gasped and reached for the phone. Vivien held up her hand. No. No police. But Rafael Corsetti was already standing. He sat in booth 12, the corner booth where he always sat, where he had been sitting every night for 2 weeks watching her move through the diner with the exhaustion of someone running on empty, and when he saw her emerge from that kitchen, when he saw what had been done to her, something shifted inside his chest like a fault line rupturing. His men, Marco and Pietro standing by the door, had never seen his face move like that. They had never seen Rafael Corsetti's careful control crack. He reached her in 4 steps. His hands hovered near her shoulders, afraid to touch and cause more pain. Up close he could see the damage clearly. The swelling. The blood. The bruises that would deepen and blacken over the next 12 hours into something that looked like war had been fought across her throat. Who did this? Not a question. A statement of intent. Vivien tried to wave him away, but her arm barely lifted. Just a customer. He got rough. It is fine. Her voice rasped through her damaged throat like she was speaking through gravel. Rafael guided her to booth 12 and sat across from her while Danny hovered uncertainly by the register, phone still in his hand, unsure what to do when a Mafia boss was handling the situation. The diner fell into silence except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tell me who did this to you. She looked at him, her one good eye meeting his. Why do you care? I am nobody. You stood up for Mr. Chen when armed men wanted to hurt him. You are not nobody. She laughed, bitter, and winced at the pain that shot through her jaw. I am a waitress with $78 in my pocket and $200,000 in debt I did not sign for. I am the definition of nobody. Rafael signaled Marco with barely a glance. First aid kit. Ice. Now. His lieutenant disappeared into the back without a word. Rafael turned back to Vivien, and his eyes were different now, colder, sharper, focused on her like a predator that had finally found the prey it had been tracking. The debt. Tell me who holds it. She hesitated. Every instinct told her that speaking these words aloud to a man like this was dangerous, that names and numbers had power and consequence, that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. But the pain across her throat demanded truth. The swelling in her eye demanded honesty. Marcus Webb, she whispered. My landlord. He transferred the building mortgage to my name somehow, through paperwork I never signed. He says I owe $200,000. I have 5 days to pay him or he takes my daughter. She repeated the number because it lived in her brain now, a constant hum, a countdown clock. $200,000. I have been working 3 jobs. Diner shifts, warehouse overnight shifts, office cleaning on weekends. I have slept for hours a night for the past 7 days. I have made $4,200. It is not enough. It will never be enough. Marco returned with a first aid kit and a towel wrapped around ice. He set them on the table and retreated. Rafael opened the kit with careful hands. In 15 years working for him, Marco had never seen Rafael Corsetti touch another human being with gentleness. The men exchanged a look, Pietro from by the door, Danny from behind the register, a look that said something fundamental had just shifted. This will hurt, Rafael said, and took out gauze and antiseptic. He cleaned the cut on her lip with fingers that were surprisingly gentle for hands that had ordered the disappearance of men. She flinched but did not pull away. He applied ice wrapped in clean cotton to her swollen eye, holding it there with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that broken things require time and stillness to heal. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because I know what it is like when someone uses the people you love as leverage." Those words hung in the cold pre-dawn air like a confession, like something he did not normally say. Vivien understood, in the way that wounded people recognize each other, that he was not speaking about her. He was speaking about himself. Over the next hour, the diner silent except for the occasional car passing on Commonwealth Avenue, Vivien told him about Lily. 6 years old. Wants to be a veterinarian. Draws pictures of animals in colors that do not exist in nature: blue dogs, purple cats, horses with wings. The apartment in Dorchester, 4th floor, no elevator, radiator broken 3 months ago, Marcus Webb refusing to fix it, so she and Lily sleep under 3 blankets even though it is November. The jobs. The exhaustion. The way her hands shake now constantly because her body is shutting down piece by piece. Rafael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The debt is gone. I will handle Marcus Webb." She stared at him. The ice fell from her eye. "I do not want charity. It is not charity. It is justice. I do not even know your name." Rafael Corsetti. Recognition flickered in her good eye. Even she had heard that name. Every person in Boston had heard that name, whispered in warning, spoken with fear. "You are the..." "Yes." "Why would you care about a waitress? Why would the Mafia boss of Boston risk anything for me?" He set the ice back on her swollen eye and met her gaze directly. "Because 6 years ago, my own brother betrayed our family to our enemies for money. He put a price on our head. I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival and I have regretted it every single day since. You chose to stand up for a stranger when it put you in danger. That kind of courage is rare." The diner fell into profound silence. Outside, the city was beginning to wake. A garbage truck rumbled past. A taxi honked somewhere distant. The November wind rattled the windows. What neither of them knew was that Sophie Langford had been standing outside the diner window for the past 30 minutes, watching through the glass as Rafael Corsetti held ice against a waitress's face, as he bent forward to listen to her story, as he made a promise that would echo through the city and eventually through her own carefully constructed life. Sophie Langford, 41 years old, old Boston money dating back for generations, designer coat worth more than Vivien's annual salary, was Marcus Webb's silent partner in the housing scheme, and more than that, his lover, his accomplice, his equal in cruelty. She stood in the cold and watched and understood that Vivien Rivera had just made a very dangerous enemy in Rafael Corsetti, which meant Sophie Langford had just made her own choice. She would destroy this woman. Not quickly. Not violently. That was Marcus Webb's way. Sophie would do it systematically, methodically, the way old money destroys those beneath them. She pulled out her phone and texted her assistant, "I need everything. Background, family, habits, weaknesses. Everything." The next afternoon, Vivien picked up Lily from school. Her daughter ran toward her with the joy that only 6-year-olds possess, unaware that her mother's throat was still black with bruises, that her mother had not slept in 36 hours, that the world was about to crack open. Lily threw her arms around Vivien's waist and did not notice her mother wince. A woman waited by the school gate. She wore a camel coat that hung perfectly from her shoulders. Her heels were designer, her jewelry understated but real, her hair blonde and cut with precision in a salon that cost more than Vivien made in a month. She had a smile that looked warm but was not, like a knife wrapped in silk. "Miss Rivera? I am Sophie Langford. I work with the Housing Authority in coordinating services for vulnerable families." Vivien's stomach tightened. "Is this about the building?" "Oh no, dear. This is about your daughter." Sophie's eyes drifted to Lily, who was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, creating a picture of a rainbow beneath an impossible sun. "There have been complaints about your fitness as a mother. Working all night, leaving a 6-year-old alone. We may need to investigate the home environment. My daughter is never alone. My neighbor watches her. Mrs. Chen. Yes, I looked into that. She is 84 with early-stage dementia. Hardly a suitable guardian. We have standards, Miss Rivera. Standards that exist to protect children. She handed Vivien a business card. The paper was expensive, thick, textured. Expect a visit from social services. Very soon. Do not be alarmed. It is simply a routine investigation. She walked away, heels clicking on concrete, leaving Vivien standing frozen with that business card trembling in her hand and Lily still drawing her impossible son on the sidewalk, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them was about to collapse. For the first time in 7 days, Vivien felt not desperation but terror, the kind of terror that comes not for yourself but for the people you love, the kind that has no solution, no amount of money that can purchase safety. Rafael Corsetti stands at his office window overlooking the Boston harbor at 3 in the morning, the city lights reflecting off black water like scattered diamonds. The bourbon sits untouched on his mahogany desk. Behind him, the office is all dark wood and leather, a room that costs more to furnish than most people earn in a year, and yet it feels like a cage. For 3 weeks he has watched Vivien sneak through Boston after dark. After her diner shift ends at midnight, she disappears into office buildings in the financial district, carrying heavy canvas bags. She emerges hours later with her hands wrapped in fresh bandages, the skin beneath them raw and bleeding from chemical burns. Then the warehouse in Dorchester. Then a different building. Always the bags. Always secretive. Always alone. Marco reported it all with careful precision. Pietro added the detail that stopped Rafael's heart. She meets with a man. 40s, expensive suit, parking garage meetings at 2 in the morning. Conversations that last an hour. Whispered words Rafael cannot hear. In his world, betrayal has one price. When his brother Vincent betrayed the family to the Salvatore rivals, Rafael drove him to the harbor himself. His own blood. Vincent cried in the car, begged for mercy, promised he had made a mistake. Rafael listened to every word, and then he did what needed to be done. Mercy is a luxury the powerful cannot afford. It is a weakness that destroys empires. Rafael trusted Vivien. He broke his own rules for her. He paid her debt. Fixed her apartment. Ensured her daughter ate 3 meals a day. And she is working 3 secret jobs, meeting with strange men, carrying bags like a courier, like someone being used by someone else. He remembers her face that night in the diner, Marcus Webb's handprints bruising her throat, blood on her lip. He remembers thinking she was unbreakable. He remembers believing that was real. But Vincent's tears were real too. Rafael signals Marco with one gesture. A single nod. The decision made. Marco understands immediately. They arrive at Vivien's apartment at 4 in the morning, just as she is pulling on her waitress uniform for the diner shift. She opens the door and her face goes pale the moment she sees them. Mr. Corsetti wants to see you, Marco says. His voice carries no threat because the threat is already understood. Now? I have work in 20 minutes. Now, Pietro repeats. The drive is silent. The men in the front seat do not look at her. She sits in the back, her uniform still damp from the shower, her hands wrapped in bandages, and she does not speak. Outside, Boston passes in a blur of streetlights and closed storefronts. The city sleeping while she is dragged before the man who has owned her life for 3 weeks. They bring her to his office. Rafael stands with his back to her, watching the harbor. He does not turn around. His voice comes out quiet as a gun being cocked. For 3 weeks you have been sneaking around Boston. Meeting with men in parking garages. Carrying bags. What are you doing, Vivien? She hears the ice in those 7 words. It has been replaced. The gentleness, the protection, the way he looked at her like she was something precious, all of it gone. What remains is a man carved from stone, and she is standing before him defenseless. Working, she says. At what? Jobs. 3 of them. Like I told you. He turns. His face is a mask. I paid your debt. $12,000. Fixed your apartment. Ensured Lily attends the best school in the district. Why do you still work yourself into the ground? Because I will not owe you. Her voice trembles but does not break. Because when this, whatever this is, ends, I need to stand on my own. I need to be your equal, not your charity case. Equal. He laughs, and it is the cruelest sound she has ever heard. My lieutenant says you meet with a man downtown. Expensive suit. Who is he? She does not answer fast enough. That silence is her mistake. Are you betraying me? No. Then who is the man, Vivien? She lifts her chin despite her fear. Despite knowing that men have died for less. He is a lawyer. Rafael's hand slams against the desk, and the sound is like a gunshot in the silence. Several of his men jump outside the office. I am taking online college courses, she says, the words pouring out now, desperate as water breaking through a dam. I am working with a legal aid lawyer to sue Marcus Webb for fraud and unpaid wages. The bags are textbooks. $200 each, used copies I found online. The bandages are from cleaning chemicals burning my hands at the office building. I work 3 jobs so I can pay for classes. So I can be something more than a waitress who needs saving. Silence crashes down like a falling building. Rafael stares at her. His jaw clenches and unclenches. Something moves behind his eyes, grief, recognition, understanding. You are trying to save yourself, he says quietly. Because I will not love you from a position of debt. The words hang between them like a held breath. She did not mean to say that word. She freezes. Her hands begin to shake. Rafael opens his mouth to respond, and then his phone rings. The ringtone pierces the silence like a scream. He answers. Marco's voice comes through urgent and clipped, "Boss." Marcus Webb is at her apartment. He has the girl. Everything stops. Vivien's face drains of color. No. No, that is not possible. My neighbor is watching her. Mrs. Chen is. But she is already moving. Rafael is already moving. The car is already running. They race through Boston at dawn, traffic lights blurring past, and when they arrive at her building, the apartment door hangs open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside, furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, Lily's drawings torn from the walls and scattered across the floor like the remains of something destroyed. Mrs. Chen sits in the hallway outside her own apartment, her 84-year-old frame shaking with sobs. He came with 2 men. He showed papers. He said you owed him everything. He took the little girl. He said if you want her back, you know where to find him. Vivien collapses on the floor. Her legs no longer hold her weight. She cannot breathe properly. Her vision tunnels down to a single point of absolute terror. She has worked herself to exhaustion for 3 weeks, tried so hard to be strong, to be worthy, to be equal, and Marcus Webb has taken her daughter. 6 years old. Lily's favorite drawing, a cat with crayon whiskers, lies torn beside her hand. Rafael crouches beside her. His hand touches her shoulder. I will get her back. Vivien cannot look at him. Her voice comes out barely a whisper, he will hurt her to hurt me. He will? No, Rafael says, and his voice is something that will haunt Marcus Webb forever. He will not get the chance. He stands. He makes 2 phone calls. Within minutes, his men begin arriving at the apartment, men in dark suits moving with military precision, checking weapons, gathering intel. Pietro pulls up a file on his laptop. Luca Salvatore answers his phone on the second ring. They strike a deal in 30 seconds. Rafael will handle Marcus Webb. Luca will handle what comes after. While Rafael mobilizes, Sophie Langford makes her move. She has spent 3 weeks spreading lies throughout Boston like poison gas. That Vivien is an addict. That Lily is neglected, unsupervised, in danger. That Vivien is prostituting herself to Mafia men. She calls social services with anonymous tips. She calls the police. She calls the school board. By dawn, Vivien's name is something whispered with disgust. Sophie walks into the diner at 6 in the morning and sits in Vivien's section. She orders coffee. She waits. Vivien brings it with trembling hands. Sophie smiles, and it is the smile of something predatory. Your daughter is already gone, dear. Even if you recover her today, I have ensured social services will remove her by tomorrow. You are unfit. Everyone in Boston knows it now. The coffee cup rattles in Vivien's hands. She wants to throw it in Sophie's face. She wants to scream. Instead, she sets it down carefully on the table and walks away, because she cannot afford to give Sophie more ammunition. But what she does not understand is that Rafael has already sent his men to 12 locations across Boston, and Marcus Webb's empire is about to collapse in ways he cannot imagine. At midnight, 12 men in black tactical gear move through an abandoned warehouse in Southie like ghosts. No sirens. No warnings. Just the sound of boots on concrete and the soft click of weapons being readied. They find Marcus in an office, Lily sleeping on a couch in the corner, unharmed. He reaches for a gun. Pietro disarms him in 2 seconds flat. Marco wraps Lily in his coat, holding her against his chest like she is made of glass. Rafael enters last. Marcus sees his face and understands. His skin goes the color of old paper. Wait, Corsetti, we can deal, there is money. You put your hands on a woman under my protection, Rafael says, his voice quieter than death itself. You took a child. There is no deal for men like you. 2 of Luca Salvatore's men enter. Rafael steps aside. Marcus drops to his knees, trembling, hands clasped. Please, Corsetti, please, I will give you everything. The screaming starts and does not stop for a long time. When it finally ends, Marcus Webb is gone. Whispered later, the harbor, concrete blocks, darkness. Rafael carries Lily to the car where Vivien waits. The girl wakes as she transfers to her mother's arms. Mama. Vivien buries her face in Lily's hair and sobs, tears of terror leaving her body, tears of gratitude, tears of a mother who thought she had lost everything and somehow, against all odds, has not. The next morning, FBI agents raid Sophie Langford's Beacon Hill townhouse at dawn. Every lie she documented in emails. Every bribe tracked in her personal accounts. Fraud. Bribery. Conspiracy. Child endangerment. Federal prison, 40 years minimum. Her lawyer says she will die behind bars. She is dragged out in handcuffs while news cameras roll, her silk pajamas torn, her carefully maintained appearance destroyed. By evening, her family disowns her. By the end of the week, her name is synonymous with corruption. She will spend the rest of her life in a cell, paying for the cruelty she wielded like a weapon. Rafael finds Vivien and Lily in a safe house in Cambridge, a small apartment above a bookstore, windows overlooking a quiet street. Lily is sleeping. Vivien sits at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped in fresh bandages, her eyes hollow from the longest night of her life. She is safe, Rafael says. Marcus Webb will never hurt anyone again. Sophie Langford is in federal custody. Your name is being cleared. Vivien does not speak. She cannot. Everything she has held together for so long is breaking apart. Rafael pulls out a chair. He sits beside her, and for the first time, he is just a man. Not a boss. Not powerful. Just someone who loves her, and does not know if that love is still wanted. I am sorry, he says. For doubting you. For believing. I know, Vivien whispers. I know why you did. They sit in silence as Boston wakes up around them, the city moving forward, indifferent to the small wars being fought in apartments and parking garages, never knowing how close it came to losing something precious. Outside, the rain begins to fall. Soft at first, then harder, washing the streets clean. The rain fell soft against the windows of the small apartment above the bookstore, each drop catching the amber glow of the streetlight below. Vivien sat curled in the worn armchair near the window, a dog-eared business textbook open across her lap, the pages filled with her careful handwriting and highlighted passages in yellow and pink. Outside, Boston was sleeping. Inside, the apartment hummed with the quiet contentment of a life finally turning toward something resembling peace. 3 months had passed since that night. 3 months of careful rebuilding, of attending classes at Boston College, of working 1 shift instead of 3, of learning what it felt like to breathe without panic crushing her chest. Her first semester grades had come back last week. A 3.8 GPA. She had read the email from the registrar 5 times, still unable to believe those numbers belonged to her, a woman who for months ago could barely afford to eat. Rafael came to the diner every night. Booth 12, always. He would arrive around 11, after the dinner rush had ended and the stragglers had drifted away, and she would pour his coffee with steady hands that no longer trembled when she looked at him. They would talk for hours after her shift ended, the way people do when they are building something that matters, something neither of them quite dares to name yet. He had never kissed her. Never touched her beyond the careful brush of fingers when she handed him a cup. But the weight of what lay unspoken between them had begun to feel like the most real thing in either of their lives. Lily was asleep in the bedroom, her small nightlight shaped like a moon casting pale blue shadows across the hardwood floor. The child had finally stopped having the nightmares that used to jolt her awake screaming. Rafael had hired a therapist who came twice a week, a gentle woman named Dr. Chen who sat on the floor and drew pictures with Lily and never once asked her to relive the violence. The knock came at 11:06 p.m. Not the polite knock of a visitor. A hard, urgent pounding that made Vivien's heart seize in her chest. The textbook fell to the floor. She moved to the peephole on pure instinct, not thinking, just moving, the way bodies do when they sense danger. Rafael stood in the hallway. But not the Rafael she knew. This was a different man entirely. His tailored suit hung torn at the shoulder, the fine fabric of his white shirt dark with something that might have been blood or might have been rain. His left cheekbone bore the fresh bruise of impact, and beneath his composed expression, she could see the fracture line of genuine fear. Behind him, the narrow stairwell was crowded with men. 20 of them, maybe more, their shoulders pressed against the walls, their eyes hard and scanning, their hands resting on the visible shapes of weapons beneath their jackets. Marco stood closest to Rafael, his jaw clenched, blood dried along his temple. Pietro was third in line, his knuckles wrapped in white gauze, his expression carved from stone. She opened the door without hesitation. "We need shelter," Rafael said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "Please." She had never heard him say please. Had never seen anything in his face but absolute control, the perfect mask of a man who had learned long ago that emotion was a liability in his world. "Come in," she said, and stepped aside. The men filed past her like ghosts, silent and efficient. They lined the walls of her small living room, positioning themselves at the windows, one stationed by the kitchen doorway, another by the bedroom door where Lily slept. Their presence transformed the space. What had been a refuge became something else entirely, a safe house, a fortress, a desperate last measure. Rafael was the last to enter. He closed the door quietly behind him and leaned against it, his breathing controlled but uneven. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "There was an attack," he said finally. "The Giordano family from New York. 3 locations hit simultaneously. Marcus Webb's old connections, they wanted to reclaim territory, wanted to destabilize before the federal prosecution closed out his assets." He paused, swallowing hard. "We lost 4 men tonight. 4. The safe houses have been compromised. Every location they know about. I could not," he stopped, started again. "I could not think of anywhere else to go. Anyone else I trust." The most powerful man in Boston, standing in her doorway, helpless. Vivien saw the symmetry of it then. 6 months ago, she had stumbled bleeding onto the checkered floor of a diner, and he had gathered her up without hesitation. He had given her shelter when he had everything to lose. Now the positions had reversed, and she had the chance to return what he had given her. "You are safe here," she said. "All of you." She made coffee. 21 cups, filling her small kitchen with the sound of water running and the smell of dark roast brewing. Her hands did not shake. She set out mugs, arranged them on her narrow kitchen counter, and the men took them gratefully, these dangerous men with weapons and blood on their clothing, drinking her coffee like they were just men, tired and afraid and in need of shelter. Marco watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. After she had moved back to the stove, he leaned toward Pietro and spoke quietly, barely audible. "In 15 years, I have never seen the boss ask anyone for help. Not since Vincent." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with history neither of them would explain tonight. At 4 a.m., when the men had settled into shifts, some sleeping with their weapons across their chests, others stationed at windows with alert eyes, Rafael found Vivien in the kitchen. She had not tried to sleep. The coffee had gone cold in its pot, but she had not bothered to make more. She simply sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around an empty mug, staring at nothing. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, like a man moving through water. "My brother Vincent," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was my best friend. My closest confidant. I told him everything. Every secret the family held, every plan, every weakness." He stared at his hands. 6 years ago, I discovered he had sold us to the Salvatores. Our rivals. He had been selling us for 3 years before I found out. 3 years of information flowing to men who wanted us dead. Vivien did not move. Did not interrupt. "I had to choose," Rafael continued. "Mercy or survival. In my world, there is no third option. I chose survival. I drove him to the harbor myself. I watched the water close over him." His voice never wavered, but his hands trembled around the coffee cup. "After that, I swore I would never trust anyone again." "Not really. Trust is a weapon your enemies use against you. I built walls so high that nothing could penetrate them." He lifted his eyes to hers. "Until you," he said. Vivien reached across the table. Her hand covered his, and his trembling stopped. "You trusted me tonight," she said softly. "With your life. With your men's lives. You trusted me when you had nothing else left. You could have turned us away. Called the authorities. Saved yourself. I could have. But 6 months ago you saved me when you had nothing to gain. You cleaned my wounds. You protected my daughter. You asked nothing in return except that I live." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady as stone. "Tonight I returned the favor. Rafael Corsetti, we are equal now." He lifted her hand to his lips. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "I am in love with you, Vivien Rivera," he said. "I have been since that night in the diner when you looked at me bleeding on your kitchen table and did not flinch. Since every night in booth 12 when you poured my coffee like it was the most important thing in the world." "I know," she whispered. "I have been in love with you since that night too. Since the moment you cleaned the blood from my throat and your hands were shaking." Their first kiss tasted like cold coffee and hard-won trust, like months of careful distance finally collapsing, like two people choosing each other in a world that had taught them both that choice was a luxury they could not afford. The sunrise came at 6:23 a.m., pale and tentative, touching the edges of the city with gold. The threat had been neutralized before dawn broke. Luca Salvatore, surprisingly, had sent his own men to handle the Giordano family. The New York family had violated sacred territory, had attacked without permission from the governing council. Their punishment was swift and total. By morning, the danger had passed. Rafael's men filed out of the apartment quietly, each one pausing to nod to Vivien in a gesture that was something close to respect. Marco was last. He stood at the threshold for a moment, his young face serious. "Thank you, Miss Rivera," he said. "For sheltering us." For sheltering him. "Anytime," she replied, and meant it. Rafael lingered in her doorway, the same doorway where he had arrived broken and desperate hours before. But everything had changed. "I will see you tonight," he asked. "At the diner?" "Booth 12. 11 o'clock, she said. He kissed her forehead, lingering there for a moment, breathing her in like she was the air keeping him alive. Then he left, and the apartment was quiet again. That night at the Atlantic Diner, Vivien poured Rafael's coffee in booth 12. The checkered floor gleamed under the neon signs, the same floor where 6 months ago she had stumbled bleeding and broken. He was already waiting, his suit pristine now, his face clean of blood, but something in his eyes had shifted. The walls were still there, but they had doors in them now. Doors she held the keys to. She slid into the seat across from him after her shift ended, and he reached across the scarred formica table to take her hand. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Rafael said quietly, "we build something neither of us has ever had before. Something honest. Something equal. Something real." She thought about the distance she had traveled. From a woman counting $78 in tips in a diner at 3 in the morning. From a woman drowning under $200,000 in debt, from violence and despair and the certain knowledge that she would never escape. To this, a college student with a 3.8 GPA, sitting in a diner holding the hand of the most powerful man in Boston, and both of them choosing each other with their eyes wide open. "Every day we choose between fear and trust," she said softly. "Between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Between believing we are nobody and believing we are worthy of love. Which do you choose?" he asked. She laced her fingers through his, felt the strength in his hand, the steadiness that had carried him through 15 years of darkness. "I choose trust," she said. "I choose you. I choose us." Outside the diner windows, spring had finally broken through winter's grip. The cherry blossoms on Commonwealth Avenue were beginning to bloom, pale pink petals gathering at the curbs like promises. The cold had finally broken, and Boston was waking up to warmth and light and the possibility of new things growing where nothing had grown before. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we have more powerful stories coming tomorrow that you will not want to miss. Drop a comment telling us what you thought about Vivien and Rafael's journey. What would you have done in her position? We read every single comment, and your words matter to us. Thank you for being here with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, after the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next story. Goodbye.